here tonight, and we welcome you to this Grassroots America event. Now tonight we've got a different format. We wanted to have a conversation tonight. I think everybody is a little bit tired of the 30, 60, and 90-second sound bites. And I think both of these gentlemen are well capable of describing their positions on the issues. Many of them may indeed be similar. Perhaps you will see a difference when they talk about solutions. So tonight it's going to be a Lincoln Douglas style debate. It's not a hard and fast Lincoln Douglas style debate because that would be very difficult to carry on here. But we've got 4 topics. And the first 2 topics will come in 20-minute segments, and the last 2 will be given 15 minutes each. And these gentlemen are going to engage in a discussion about these issues. The first one will be the state of our state's fiscal house. The second one will be budget solutions for 2013 and beyond. The third will be runaway spending on social services. The fourth will be public school finance solutions. These are not easy topics. There are lots of things embedded in each one of these topics. These are not simple issues, and they don't have simple solutions. But tonight we're going to see what 2 individuals who call themselves constitutional conservatives, we're going to see what they have to say about this. And it should help you make up your mind about who you want to vote for. Now, Jason and I it's going to be easy to do timekeeping tonight because we've got ranges of time here. We're going to try to stay on message and on topic, and Jason and I are not going to engage with these 2 individuals, these 2 gentlemen, unless they're wandering off the reservation and not getting to the point. Because we really want them to stick to the topic and discuss it completely and fully. So anyway, Jason, I'm going to hand the mic to you. You've got some things to add. As I get seated, you go ahead.
All right, and just like Joanne said, most importantly, we want to hear from you guys. We don't want to interrupt, and the only time you'll hear from us is either the time has run out for the discussion, or you may bring something up. And if it sounds like if you guys are speaking in generalities or kind of big, broad strokes, Joanne or I may say, no, wait a minute, let's take that and talk specifically about execution or that sort of thing. But more than anything, we want you guys to do the discussing this evening, okay? And since Matt, since you started out, what we'll do is Leo, we're going to bring up the first topic for discussion and let you get the conversation started. And also, throughout this process, it doesn't have to be like Leo or Matt, you're lecturing us on what you would do and what you think, but very much interact, engage the other. You know, Leo, if you have something that you've done during your tenure, you say, so Matt, what would you do? That's perfectly acceptable. As a matter of fact, that would be encouraged. So with that, let's get started. Yep.
Before we start here, I just want to say again that it's good to see you here, looking well, and you have been in Jason and I's prayers over the last months, and we're glad to see you here.
Thank you very much.
Freedom comes from God, and I am grateful for the privilege to be here to meet, to discuss these important issues, and how we plan to preserve that gift of freedom. It's time for a fresh conservative approach. It's time to stop focusing on political labels and start casting votes that advance liberty. I have a positive outlook on Texas and a firm belief in the principles of individual liberty, personal responsibility, limited government, rule of law, and free enterprise. Words that are written in the Grassroots America mission statement. But I understand that Austin is a difficult place, a pressure cooker where every principle you hold dear will be tested. When the choices are laid before you, what will you choose? When powerful people ask you to abandon your principles, what will you say? If you stand for limited government, don't make government bigger. If you believe in free markets, don't create new regulations that protect certain businesses from competition. If you oppose more Washington control, stop asking for more federal money. Protecting individual liberty means allowing people to take risks, fail, and try again. Standing up for local control means returning authority to local schools. Being accountable for tax dollars means budget transparency and truth in taxation. You, the people of Texas, own this team we call state government. You pick the players. There comes a time when you have to hand the ball to a new leader. It doesn't mean that your current leader hasn't won some games and thrown some touchdowns. You appreciate what has been accomplished, but you're focused on the future. There is much at stake today. Today, the defense of our freedoms requires a fresh, conservative team. With your support, I am willing to serve. I am willing to lead.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Leo Berman. I've been serving as your state representative for 14 years. I'm running for re-election to my 8th term. And I want to tell you that I'm rated in the top 10% of all legislators as far as being in the conservative corner for 14 years, always. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our forefathers chose life to be the first one that our Creator has given us. It doesn't come from Washington. It doesn't come from Austin. In fact, President Obama leaves out those 3 words. Endowed, he forgets by our Creator every time he recites from the Declaration of Independence. And now, I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but I'm not going to say it. But anyway, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about 7 principles that I hold dear to my heart. 7 principles that I always consider when I vote on your behalf in the Texas legislature. There's one thing above those 7 principles that mean a lot to me and to my wife. And I'm going to talk about them as we go along with this meeting today. There's a famous man in the Bible, in the Old Testament, who said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And above those 7 principles, we hold true to those words of Joshua when he said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, gentlemen, the first topic is the state of our state's fiscal house. And that is going to run us from, well, we'll end up about 7 o'clock on that first topic. So anything that you want to say that let the people know what you think about the state of our state's fiscal house. Leo?
I've been criticized by my opponent for voting for the last budget that we passed during the last session of the legislature. I want to talk about that for just a minute. Budgets are only influenced in committee. That's where you influence a budget. Once that budget number gets to the floor of the House, if you want to amend the budget, you can't change the amount of the budget. And if you can get an amendment passed, if you're lucky enough to get an amendment passed, you can move money from one pot to another, but you can't take it out of the budget. I was criticized by my opponent for voting against Representative David Simpson's amendment to the budget last year, in which he wanted to strike $2 million from the Arts Commission. Well, we had already struck 70% of the Arts Commission's budget, but they actually had ongoing grants to our public schools all over the state. I wasn't about to take their last $2 million because all the amendment did was to move it over to the Department of Aging and Disability Services. That's exactly what it did. It might have been different if we were able to strike it from the budget. That's one thing. But I didn't want to kill the Arts Commission at that time because of ongoing grants to our public schools across the state. So, once the budget gets to the floor, that number can't be changed. So if you vote against the budget, and since I've been criticized for voting for the budget, I'm going to assume, Matt, that you would have voted against the budget. You would have joined 2 others out of 150 members of the House in voting against the budget. And voting against the budget, though, which funds your nursing homes, your public schools, your junior colleges, your 4-year schools, it funds everything in our district. If the budget is balanced and there are no tax increases, I can assure you that I've been working behind the scenes with the committee, with the Appropriations Committee, in order to do what I can before the bill comes to the floor of the House. So if the budget is balanced, if it's balanced and there's no tax increase, we have got to vote for the budget so we can fund everything in our district. I yield to you.
In 14 years that you've been in office, you've never voted against a budget. And you can look over the last 20 years in Texas and you can see very clearly that state spending has been more than double what population growth and inflation has done. Spending has gone up and up and up and up. And every time the budget comes forward, you're a yes vote. Every time. Now, you say, what's the most important influence on the budget? I'd say it would be that yes vote. Now, you mentioned the amendment by our fellow East Texan David Simpson, who also voted against the budget. He wanted to take $2.5 million out of the Arts Commission. And the opponents, mainly Democrats, made the case that this would cut off federal funding for the Arts Commission because there was going to be matching money. Now let's just break that down for a second. We have a spiraling national debt that is threatening the future of our country to the point that the Secretary of Defense now lists the budget problems as a threat to our national security. I've read the U.S. Constitution, and funding for the arts isn't in there. I've read the Texas Constitution, and I don't see how the arts is the proper role of government. And so there's a bigger issue than just taking $2.5 million away from the Arts Commission and giving it to the agency that deals with nursing homes. The issue is, why are you funding it to begin with? If you're for limited government, if you're for constitutional government, you stop chasing federal money that's spiraling our debt, and you put government back in a constitutional-sized box.
The Democrat Party controlled the entire Texas legislature from the time of the writing of our Constitution in 1878 until the year 2006. That's why the Arts Commission is in the Texas budget. We don't want to kill it completely. We cut 70% of the Arts Commission's budget. But in 2006, we elected the first Republican Speaker of the House in Texas history, and we start making dramatic changes from 2006 until today. Every budget I voted for of the 14, of the 7 budgets, not 14. I've been in the legislature 14 years. I've been in 7 sessions. But every budget that I voted for, Matt, was not only balanced, but there was no tax increases in that budget. A vote against the budget that could be influenced in committee and hardly on the floor would be a vote against our nursing homes and our public schools and our junior colleges and our everything in the district. I wouldn't vote against everything in the district as long as the budget is balanced and there is no tax. Did any one of you see a tax increase from the state? If you did, raise your hand.
Let me interrupt you there. Go back to the point that we're making. You were chasing federal money.
I didn't even think of the federal money. I was saving the Arts Commission and the grants that they had for going to other schools in the state.
When you go back and read the transcript of the floor debate that day, the Democrats were at the mic saying, we need this so we can get federal money. I got that straight out of the transcript. So if you were on the House floor, the Democrats are there saying, we need federal money for the arts and not the nursing homes. And so let me ask you a direct question. Is spending money on the arts the proper role of state government?
No, but we didn't put it in there. It's in there. It's been in there for 100 years. The Democrats controlled the House. Remember I said that. From 1878 until 2000. There's a lot of things in the budget I don't like. But there's a way to get rid of them without destroying one agency after we took 70% out of that agency.
In over all these 14 years you've been in office, state spending has far outpaced inflation and population growth. If you vote for the budget every single time, you own that. You're responsible for that growth in government.
I agree. But the budget is always balanced, and there is no tax increase, man. Now, when you vote against it, let me tell you who you would have joined this last session. Every Democrat except one voted against the budget this last session. And they voted against the budget this last session because we cut $16 billion in programs out of that budget. They didn't like that. We cut the budget by $16 billion this last session, and every Democrat except one voted against it.
I would have joined fellow conservative David Simpson in voting against the budget. Let's talk about those cuts in spending. Where did the cuts in spending come from? Primarily from the stimulus money being gone, no more federal money. And secondly, from the accounting tricks. From the left and from the right, groups all over the state have characterized this budget as smoke and mirrors, as deception. Our friends at Texas Public Policy Foundation called it the bad and the ugly. Now, so if you want to just say that the budget was balanced, then you need to tell the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is that you did not fund everything that was supposed to be paid for. You took money out of the schools and you shifted it into the next budget. You did all these accounting tricks. In fact, the comptroller's cash report is now saying that there are over 246 dedicated accounts in the budget. A dedicated account is an account that says this goes for this purpose and it doesn't go to general revenue. That's the law. But this last session, they counted all the money in those dedicated accounts, and they said, this counts towards general revenue, folks. We, quote unquote, balance the budget.
Now, let me tell you where it all starts from. It all starts on the first day of the session when you elect the Speaker of the House. I led the effort to defeat the Speaker of the House. There were 14 of us that did that. We're known as the Texas 14. In fact, they tried very, very hard to have a voice vote on who's voting for the Speaker and who's voting against it.
We're not talking about the Speaker, we're talking about the budget.
Well, the Speaker influences the budget 100% of the time, man. You'll find that out if you're elected this session. It's the Speaker's voice to the committee chair of the Appropriations Committee who's telling him exactly where that budget's going to go this year. I called for a record vote on the Speaker of the House. I stood up and said, I object to a voice vote on Speaker. Every single group in the state wanted us to oppose the Speaker, and 14 of us did that because we had a liberal, pro-choice Speaker.
Let's go back to the topic of the budget. You have yet, in all the public appearances since I've seen you after the session's been over, you have yet to address the accusations about this budget that are coming from our friends, from our enemies, from every sector of the state. They are calling it accounting tricks, gimmicks. Read the publications from Texas Public Policy Foundation.
I have.
Explain how you can vote for that.
Well, that's why this year I've already signed on to the Texas Budget Compact. As soon as Michael Quinn Sullivan and the conservative groups in which Joanne sat on, as soon as they came out with a budget which says we're going to practice truth in budgeting, support a constitutional limit of spending to the growth of population and inflation, oppose any new taxes, preserve a strong rainy day fund, and cut unnecessary duplicative government programs. Wait, let me finish this point. Just want to finish this one point. I've signed on to the budget compact. I could not influence as one person what you're talking about. But when the budget comes to the floor and everything in my district is at stake, including colleges, universities, and public schools, and you're going to vote against our retired teachers' pension fund and everything else, then I take it. When you vote against the budget, because that's in the budget
Representative
too.
Berman,
Yeah.
quite frankly, what you're saying is that as long as the comptroller comes forward and says the budget is certified to be balanced, then you're going to vote for it automatically. You're not going to. You'd think in 14 years, either because the spending has gone up and up and up, or because the spending is on the wrong priorities, you would think in 14 years, one time you would have stood like Representative Simpson did and said, no.
He's having, I'll say, let me say this. I'm voting for my public schools and everybody else in the district as long as the budget is balanced, and one other thing, and there are no tax increases. You would have been voting against everything in your district if you voted no during the last session, and that's what you said you would have done.
Really quickly, just bring it back, there's a lot of budget talk, with about 7 minutes left. The state of our state's fiscal house. So with all this has been said, is our fiscal house in order?
Okay, so one thing that we can do is say that we don't know for sure. And one reason is because the budget is so complex that guys with PhDs and advanced degrees cannot understand the budget layout. Even the legislators cannot do that. There was an amendment by a fellow East Texan to simply change the way the budget was laid out so that we could see where the money was going, a budget transparency amendment. Let me repeat that, a budget transparency amendment, so that we could understand where the money was going and where it was coming from. So these accounting tricks would stop. And you voted against that transparency amendment.
I voted against the transparency amendment for a good reason, and for that reason it was defeated. And let me tell you why it was defeated. Our forefathers were very wise. They said when the Texas legislature is not in session, all Texans were safe. So they gave us 140 days every other year. That amendment would have added weeks to the budget process, and we don't have the time. 140 days is all we got. Every other year.
Let me make 2 points there. One, record vote number 1209, amendment number 45, actually passed in the House. The bill that it was attached to failed. And it's interesting now that you're opposed to that amendment, because the exact same language was in a bill that when the House began its session, you co-authored. You put yourself as a co-author on the exact same language. You said, I'm for that. But then when it came time for a vote in front of the entire House, there was the same language. There was the same transparency amendment. And you said no. And now here today you're saying it's a bad idea because it would have added time?
Well, at the beginning of the session, I voted for it because we had 140 days ahead of us. In May, when the appropriations bill came to the floor, and we voted on that amendment, I voted against it because we didn't have the time. We had 30
Leo, that's
days to
just
go.
not true, because that amendment, that bill that you co-authored, never left committee because somebody kept it in committee. So you can't say that you voted for it because you weren't on that committee. It didn't get a vote. When it did come to the floor, you voted. You can't have both sides of the transparency argument.
It was my bill. You know I would have voted for my own bill. There's no question about it.
But you voted against your own bill.
Well, I voted against it in May. In May, with no time left to complete a budget and go home.
The bill.
That's all we have to do in the Constitution, is to complete a budget. It's the only thing we have to do.
The bill was for next cycle's budget. It wasn't even
I can read
effective.
that into the bill, man.
The bill was so that the next time the budget was presented, it would have to be laid out in a manner so people could understand it. Now, what I don't understand is how you can be on both sides of this issue.
Well, just like every other conservative, all 14 except David Simpson were on my side of that issue. Conservatives voted entirely, 98 Republicans. 3 Republicans voted against it, 98 voted for the budget.
I'm reading the record from the House Journal. 85 yeas, 63 nays, 2 present not voting.
That's
Look
on
at
the
all
amendment.
Yes,
That's on the amendment.
It's exact same language.
We're talking about the total budget right now. 98 Republicans voted for the total budget.
Let me go back to something.
Every conservative in the House.
You talk about these conservative groups over and over again, and I understand that they do a lot of good work, and you say that you've been endorsed by every conservative group in the state of Texas.
That's correct.
That was true in the past. This election cycle, you have not been endorsed by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility.
They don't endorse.
They are endorsing people all over the country, all over the state.
I
You have
don't
not-
think they endorse. I don't think they had the power to endorse.
They are endorsing people all over the state.
Michael Quinn Sullivan.
He's endorsed Ted Cruz. He's
Yeah.
endorsed all sorts of people. You don't have the endorsement of Young Conservatives of Texas.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
They have already published. They have already published their endorsements, and you weren't
Okay.
one of them.
Okay, okay. We are way off the fiscal state of Texas now. We're into endorsements. So y'all bring it back on the reservation for just a couple more seconds, and then we're going to end this round.
All right, I'll get back to the budget one more time. We have a budget of $180 billion. It takes a long time to put that budget together. It takes a lot of heads working together. 98 Republicans voted for that budget, including myself. I voted for that budget. And I'm very proud because it was balanced, certified by the comptroller, and also there was no tax increase. This session, I already signed a no tax increase pledge, and I already signed a pledge to support the budget compact as put together by the conservative groups in Austin. The governor has already come out in support of it, which was very surprising to me, but I'm glad to see that he has, and I signed on to his budget compact also. You want to wrap that up now?
Are we at time?
Got about a minute.
If you're proud of the budget that was passed, then you are ignoring a huge problem in the state of Texas. And it is that Texans are losing faith in how their tax dollars are being spent. Because it's tricks, folks. They tell you that the budget is certified balanced. But they don't tell you that all the monies that were supposed to go for fees to trauma centers won't go there. They're going to go for the general budget. They don't tell you that these fees over here that are supposed to go for this purpose don't go. They won't tell you that your fuel tax that you pay at the gas pump is being diverted to other things. So if you're proud of that budget and in 14 years you can't say no and stand against it in principle, then, folks, you've got a choice this election.
All right. Well, we've got a little bit more budget talk, guys. Not that y'all have anything to say about it. All right. For the next 20 minutes, let's discuss budget solutions for 2013 and beyond. And Matt, you get to start this round.
I'm sorry, would you repeat?
You bet. Budget solutions for 2013 and beyond.
As far as I'm concerned, there is only one budget.
Matt gets to
solution.
start this round.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll let him go with that.
Okay.
There is only one budget solution, and that's the budget compact that was put together by the TPPF and Joanne and the other groups in Texas, and now that the governor has latched on to. And that does the 5 things I mentioned before: practice truth in budgeting, support a constitutional limit of spending to the growth of population and inflation, oppose any new taxes or tax increases, preserve a strong rainy day fund, and cut unnecessary and duplicative government programs and agencies. I love to go that route. The Speaker of the House, once again, has not signed on to the budget compact. The Speaker of the House has to go. And once again, I'll stand against the Speaker of the House. And I'll call for a record vote on people who vote for and people who vote against the speaker.
Well, I think there's a lot of common ground that we would have on the budget compact. But if you read that first one, it says practice truth in budgeting. We're a little late to the dance. Support a limit on spending growth. Well, you could have voted against spending growth in any of the 14 years you've been in office. We're not short on ideas, okay? There are a lot of good conservatives who have worked hard. There are bills that can be presented. There are a lot of duplicative programs that can be looked at throughout the state. We have agencies that are doing the same thing as the other agency. We have agencies that probably shouldn't exist. We have a lot of, we're told to make tough choices as legislators. So when it comes to something like the Arts Commission or things that are not involved in the proper role of state government, we are for limited government as Republicans. But we shouldn't always have an asterisk after that. Well, if it's good for my district, or if it involves something that I really care about. No, it should be part of the constitutional role of government. We've got a lot of regulation that needs to be addressed. Let's talk about that for a second. When you say you're for keeping government small, how can you vote to grow government? And I'll give you a specific example. In 2003, you voted to create a brand new state agency that didn't exist. Now, you can argue about whether that was a good idea or a bad idea for that agency. But you cannot say that you didn't vote to grow government.
What agency was that?
The Texas Residential Construction Commission. And then in 2009, when it came up for a vote again, and it was going to die unless it was kept alive, you voted to keep it alive again and put an entire regulatory burden over the state economy and the building industry. As Republicans, folks, day one, you say, I want to keep government smaller. So when Republicans say, well, we've got to create this new state agency because such and such association wants us to do it, that's a conservative thing. Watch out, folks. We've lost our way.
Matt just mentioned the Texas Residential Construction Commission. Looking out in the audience, I see a couple of master builders here. It was the master builders and the builders associations around the state that asked that this happen so that no fly-by-night home builders will get into that trade and start putting up homes not knowing what they're doing. The people who own homes had no recourse if they bought a new home and they found they had a cracked foundation or cracked plaster. They had no place to go. There was no mediation. Their builders at that time just shoved them aside and said, if you want to take this up in court, let's go to court. Now with the Texas Residential Construction Commission, and all these commissions are asked by professional groups. They ask us to do this to maintain the professionalism of their industry. That's why they do this.
Okay.
And now they have mediation.
But the question is about the growth in government. When you create a new state agency, yes or no, is government getting bigger?
I'd have to debate that with you, Matt. We're talking about a commission. Talking about a commission that helps homeowners and builders both. We're not talking about another Department of Health, another Attorney General's office, another major agency that's going to consume hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about an agency that, for example, you're an attorney. How would you like it if attorneys didn't have to be licensed? We can do away with the agency that licenses attorneys. Let anybody practice law.
You created a brand new bureaucracy in Austin. You can put whatever shade of nuance on that you want to, but government got bigger. Did they have new regulations that went along with that agency?
They were the regulations that both the builders and the homeowners agreed to.
So
for
we've
that
now gotten you to
agency.
concede that you have grown government and you've added regulation.
I'd
That
vote for
doesn't-
it again.
That doesn't sound like a Republican.
I would vote for the
Jason, how many?
Texas Residential Construction Commission again. It's done an outstanding job.
It doesn't exist anymore.
I know it.
Went
Okay,
out of business, but it did an outstanding job for the
No,
time that we did it.
No, let me make the point here. The Sunset Commission, which its job was to review the Texas Residential Construction Commission, their report called it a substantial failure. The agency that was set up to be the watchdog came to the legislature and says, this isn't working. That's why it went away. So if you're going to argue that it did a great job, then why didn't you pass a bill to get it brought back into life?
Because I'm one person out of 150. Just like I was the leader of the fight against the speaker, one out of 150. As a freshman legislator, if you're elected, you're not going to be able to do anything there for at least several years until you know what you're doing.
If
Okay.
that's the truth, hold on one minute. If that's the,
Going into something else. And I'm sorry.
okay. You don't tell the moderator to hold on. That is just very bad form. Okay, let's kind of clear the deck here for a minute. Let's forget that we have a Speaker of the House. I want to try to draw out of you guys what you would actually do if you had the authority and the power to do it. So now, we're talking about budget solutions into 2013. We haven't nearly covered the detail that I want to hear. So I want to know, what would you do? You're looking at this behemoth of state government. We agree, it spends too much, it's too big. So what are you going to do to corral it?
you got to vote for tax and expenditure limits. You got to vote to cut over regulation on unnecessary programs and subsidies. You got to vote to reduce social welfare spending. We have too many people that are climbing in the wagon and not enough people that are pulling the wagon. We can look at how we're spending our Medicaid dollars, how we're spending our food stamp dollars, and there's a lot of those folks that can actually pay something. You see them at the grocery store. They come in there, they pay for food stamps with a Lone Star, or they get their groceries with a Lone Star card, and then they buy 2 cases of beer with cash. Okay? We need to reform that. I think if you're on Medicaid and you go to the doctor, you ought to have to pay at least the cost of a McDonald's value meal when you go see a doctor or a dentist. The state of Texas, let's talk about that budget we're so proud of. The state of Texas spent as much providing free braces for children in Texas as all 49 other states combined. That's that budget we're so proud of. All 49 other states combined is what we spent on braces. Now, I had crooked teeth when I was growing up, and my parents didn't go to get free braces for me. And when I became an adult, I got them fixed and I paid for it myself. Why don't we pass a bill that cuts that nonsense out? That's the kind of stuff that's in the budget that needs to be looked at. And we do need to pass that transparency amendment that changes the way the budget is laid out so we can actually see how the money's being spent.
I agree with Matt. I would throw in a few other things, though. Florida just passed a great bill, which I'm going to introduce next session if you re-elect me. And it requires drug testing for all welfare recipients. That bill is important. In fact, I think Florida is going to get rid of a lot of people who are on welfare right now if they fail the drug test, and many of them will fail the drug test. I want to tell you that Texas is still the #1 state out of all 50 states. People come to Texas because they're attracted by business in Texas. People come to Texas because of the way we tax. We don't have very high taxes in Texas, except for the property tax, which I would like to do away with completely, and this is my second point. For 6 years now, we've been working on some way possible to do away with the property tax completely and go to a statewide consumption tax that everybody pays, including illegal aliens, drug dealers. Everybody would have to pay the same thing if we can possibly do that. One thing that we have to do along those lines, though, is to try and get the sales tax rate down low enough where we can sell it and pass it. Because if you expand the base of the sales tax and you include medical care, if you include medical care and drugs, the sales tax rate would be close to 16%. That's too high. If you don't expand the base, you don't include medical care or drug care or prescription drugs, the sales tax rate would be 21 cents. So we've got to try and find some solution to where everybody is paying the tax. The biggest problem we have in the United States right now is that 49% of our citizens don't pay any tax at all.
Representative
51% of them, 51% of us support the other 49%. Go ahead, Matt, I'm sorry.
I agree with that sentiment. I just, what bills did you author last session to do any of that?
We took it up with Michael Quinn Sullivan and the conservative groups.
He's not a member of the legislature.
I understand that. But we had to find the sales tax rate that we can possibly sell on the floor of the House. And the lowest rate that we can get to was 16%. That's too high a sales tax rate. We'd have people leaving to go buy purchase goods in Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and maybe even Old Mexico. We couldn't find the rate yet, but we're going to find that rate. And hopefully, the United States government would do the same thing at some point in time.
Real quick here, Matt, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that there are agencies or there are fees that are paid into the state, and the money is not spent where it should. And one of the red flag that always comes up when I hear that is TxDOT, which talks about transportation funding and gas taxes. So as it applies to the budget, transportation being a major issue as it relates to our state budget, could you talk a little bit about that as it pertains to the budget?
We all pay fuel tax for every gallon of gas that we buy. And when you pay a fuel tax, what does the public think we're putting money into? The roads, right? But that's only half true. For decades in Texas, they've been taking money out of the fuel tax and diverting it into general revenue. So all of a sudden they create this fight between a classroom and a road. It's a lose-lose battle. And I'm not aware of any effort from this end that has been undertaken to stop that. It's an extremely difficult problem. And Representative Berman, in the legislature's defense, it's been going on for so long and so many people have just accepted it. It's become a problem. But the problem then is that when we're doing it with the fuel tax, let's do it with the propane tax. Let's do it with the surcharge on people who get too many tickets. Let's do it on this fee and that fee. And they've done it over and over and over again. And even under a Republican House, nothing seems to be done about it.
There are two places the fuel tax goes to other than TxDOT. And like you said, it's been done for a long, long time. Many, many years ago, someone figured out that if you have a fuel tax, you ought to fund a portion of the highway patrol out of the fuel tax. And I think it's something like 5 to 8% of the fuel tax pot goes to the Texas Highway Patrol because they patrol the highways that we all drive on. The other thing is school buses. It goes for school buses as well. Last session, we had a major battle over taking those funds away from school buses and the highway patrol and using all of it for Texas road building. We couldn't get the votes to do that. We tried, but it just wouldn't fly. You have to have a majority of votes in the House and the Senate before the governor will sign anything.
When you talk about spending, and we're talking about state government spending, you can see that go back to like 2007, state government has been taking a larger portion of the private economy in Texas. More and more and more every year. It's one thing to look at the individual things you spend on and just say, well, the budget's balanced, so we're great, we're doing good. Folks, we can do better than that. If government at the state level is getting larger and larger and larger and taking more and more and more money out of the private sector in Texas, don't we need to ask more questions other than just, is the budget balanced? We need to ask, does government need to be restrained? And a no vote on the budget sends a clear signal. Start over, boys. We'll stay down here till we get a budget that's right. A no vote on the budget is not a vote against my district. A no vote on my budget is not a vote against schools. All those things are appropriate. They're within the Constitution. It's disingenuous to say that you're going to vote against the budget, you're going to vote against schools and roads. That's ridiculous. A vote against the budget is to say, boys, roll up your sleeves. We're not leaving this room until we get it right. We will stay down here, and it doesn't matter if the speaker doesn't like it. We're going to vote no and tell the truth about the budget.
Matt, you go ahead and vote no, and then go up to the governor's office and ask him if he'll keep you down there. He'll say, for your no vote, maybe, but I doubt it.
When his paycheck doesn't show up, I bet you he'll keep us in session.
His paycheck has shown up no matter what he's done for the last 10 years now. He has got it done. What do you mean by the state government has taken a larger portion of the private economy in Texas? Would you explain that?
Yeah, I'm referring to Bill Peacock's research that he's done. It shows how private sector gross domestic product in Texas, what the private economy produces in Texas, is where government money comes from. Government money comes from the private sector. Do we understand that? Yes. And state government takes a portion of it. Every year, that portion has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so even as the economy grows, that's great. But when you look at how much it's taking in the pie, the percentage has been getting higher.
The state government proportion to the private economy is $90 billion a year over a biennium or 2-year period, which we fund for. That's $180 billion. The economy of Texas is $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year. We have the best economy in the United States. We draw more businesses to Texas. 1,000 new people come into Texas moving here every single day for jobs. We have the best economy in the United States, man, bar none. States come to Governor Perry's office asking him how we do it. And he tries to explain. We don't raise taxes, we have a good tax system, and we make business and regulations attractive to business so that businesses are attracted to Texas.
30 seconds, Matt.
This budget not only used accounting tricks and gimmicks, it increased the number of state employees that were authorized, number of full-time equivalent employees in the state of Texas. Even though all the private sector guys, what were they doing in 2009? They were laying people off. But state government, the budget, authorized more full-time equivalent employees than it did the previous budget. How do you do that in the worst economy in 50 years? Only in Austin.
Okay, gentlemen, the next segment will be a 15-minute segment, and it's runaway spending on social services. So now think about everything that makes up social services. Think about them in detail. And then think about, and then explain what you would do. Name the problem, define the problem, and then what your solutions would be.
I've got to give a little bit of background before I get the major problem itself, but in February 2009, President Obama addressed the United States Congress in joint session, and he said that Obamacare will not impact illegal aliens at all. And someone from South Carolina yelled out, "Liar." Do you remember that? He later apologized, but the president was lying, because if Obamacare gets out of the U.S. Supreme Court, and we have to implement it in Texas, we have 2 million illegal aliens in Texas, and every single one of them will have to go on Texas state Medicaid at a cost of $27 billion a year. That's going to be the biggest hit that Texas has ever had to absorb. It's outrageous. So I'm praying that the U.S. Supreme Court will kill Obamacare before it gets out of that
Representative
court.
Berman, before you go any farther, I agree with your sentiment on Obamacare, but I've heard you now in many speeches give this number: 2 million illegal immigrants and $27 billion a year.
They're illegal aliens. They're not illegal immigrants.
Whatever 2 million, they're people, illegal aliens. $27 billion a year makes no mathematical sense. You could give them each $10 million apiece, and you still wouldn't achieve $27 billion a year in healthcare services. I don't know where you get those numbers.
From the governor's office and the governor's economic advisor. That's exactly where it comes from.
Okay, let's just do a simple math. 2 million people, $1 billion is $1,000 million. It doesn't add up.
I didn't bring the numbers with me, Matt. The number is correct. It's $27 billion as put out by the governor's office, not only in his national presidential campaign, it's the number he gave to the legislature during the last session. If Obamacare passes and we put 2 million people on state Medicaid, it's going to cost $27 billion.
In 1 year?
No, over the 2-year biennium.
Or even 2 years, it doesn't make sense.
I'm sorry, but that's, I got to follow the economic advisor and the comptroller. This is what they've told us. You got to hang your hat on somebody.
Social services. When you look at the projection that we're getting, the Health and Human Services Director told us that we're going to have a $10 billion problem in 2014. $10 billion is the number that I'm working with. And it all comes back to Medicaid spending. Folks, we don't have a debt problem in this country. We have a health care spending problem in this country. Think of any good or service that you buy. Go buy a car. Go get a lawyer. Go to the mechanic. You think about price. But in healthcare, you don't think about price. All you do is ask, what is my deductible and what is my copay? Does anybody know do you ever get a bill or do you ever get a menu when you walk in the doctor's office and say, how much is this going to cost? You don't know. The doctors really don't know exactly what it costs. So when you have millions of consumers that don't understand or don't have to think about cost, then it's going to be a problem. So we have to find ways in state government, especially in Medicaid, to shift the incentives. Medicaid is a fee-for-service program. That means when you go to the doctor, every time he performs a service, he gets a fee. Performs a service, he gets a fee. He doesn't have to get paid based on outcomes. So as long as that's the incentive, we're going to be in trouble. So what we have to do as the state of Texas is we're going to have to say at some point the federal strings are going to have to be cut. We may actually have to consider opting out of Medicaid at some point. And that is a very difficult thing to get your mind wrapped around because there's so much federal money involved. But folks, the old saying, if it can't keep going, it won't. That's what's going to happen with healthcare spending.
Man, I'm going to have to get back to illegal aliens again. Illegal aliens in Texas number 2 million. And I introduced a number of bills last year to deal with illegal aliens in Texas. 3 years ago, I ran for governor against Governor Perry, and he called me to Austin because I was gaining the strength of the Tea Parties across the state. And he asked me what it's going to take to get me out of the race. And I told him, number one, I want you to issue an executive order to all of your state agencies, directing them to get illegal aliens off state benefits. They're entitled, and I hate to use the word entitled right now, they're entitled to two benefits. They're entitled to free health care and free education, unfortunately, at the federal level. But now, there is such sophistication in creating new driver's licenses and social security cards that they walk into any state agency and they're on state benefits like food stamps, aid to dependent children, and a host of other state welfare benefits that they're not entitled to it. So last session I introduced the bill. And that bill would have required every state agency not only to call their numbers in to the Social Security Administration from their Social Security card to make sure that they're eligible to receive benefits, but also from their driver's license to the Texas Department of Public Safety in Austin to make sure they have a valid driver's license.
Representative Berman,
Yes.
you mentioned illegal immigrants.
Aliens.
And
They're aliens.
And education.
Yeah.
You voted to give illegal aliens, to use your term, in-state tuition in Texas. So let's think about that. That means the folks that are, say, over in Hallsville or Kilgore or Corsicana or Palestine that want to come to Tyler Junior College, good Texas kids, they have to pay out-of-district tuition, which is at Tyler Junior College is almost 50% more. But if you're an illegal alien camped out in an apartment in Tyler, Texas, you get to pay the lower rate. So, you know, if we're going to talk about getting tough on illegal immigration, explain why you voted to give this advantage in social services to illegal aliens.
I'll be glad to. In the last year of the Democratic administration, they had a bill to do exactly that. And many of us were threatened with our own package that we needed for our district, our own laws that we needed for our district. The vote was overwhelming. I think only 1 or 2 Republicans voted against it. The vote was overwhelming, and in order to kill everything that I've done for the district, in a fruitless effort, I voted for it. But every session since that time, I introduced the first bill to do away with in-state tuition for illegal aliens,
Representative Berman,
but our governor supports it.
I got to stop you right there on 2 points. One, to understand your position correctly, you voted to give illegal aliens in-state tuition because you were
Yes.
threatened by Democrats, correct?
That's exactly correct.
Okay. I'm sorry that Democrats have that much influence over you. Secondly, I've looked at every bill that you've ever filed on your own. You did not file a bill that was styled under illegal immigration until 2007. In all your 4 first terms in office.
That was the next year?
No, so this was 2003 that this passed.
All right. Go ahead.
So I'm at a loss for words. If your principles can be blown over by a threat from Democrats, where do
Let
we
me
go?
explain that, Matt. There's a couple of committees in the House. One is called the Calendars Committee, and the other committee is called the, it's another Calendars Committee, but it's a Fast Calendars Committee. And I'm sorry I lost the name of it in this debate. But anyway, whoever chairs either one of those 2 committees has power over anything that's in their committee to keep it from coming out on the floor. And I had some very important legislation for this district dealing with our colleges and our junior colleges, and I wasn't going to sacrifice that, knowing that the thing is going to pass overwhelmingly anyway, and that my 1 no vote would have zero influence. But
Wasn't there a Republican Speaker of the House in 2003, Tom Craddock?
no, he came into office in 2006. It was in my third term that he came into office, 2006. But last session, I filed bills to make English the official language of Texas. I filed bills to get illegal aliens off state benefits. I filed a bill, and I co-authored and joint authored a bill to do away with in-state tuition for illegal aliens. And when your governor is for it, it's very, very hard to get something like that passed anyway. But I had 12 other bills dealing with illegal aliens. I lead the effort on illegal aliens every session.
Representative Berman, you say you lead the effort.
I do.
Of the bills you filed last session dealing with illegal immigrations, not a single bill even made it out of committee.
That's correct. The Speaker kept them all in committee, and that's why I say the Speaker's election, the number one vote that you cast in the House is probably the most important vote that you'll cast all session. If you vote against the Speaker, you won't get the committees you want. If you vote against the Speaker, your bills will go nowhere. But last session, I led the effort against the Speaker, and I called for a record vote so that everybody
You're
will know.
suggesting that a good conservative can't get anything done with 101 Republicans. They had 101 Republicans, and you're telling me you can't get anything out of committee. How did Sid Miller from Stephenville get the sonogram bill passed?
I tell you.
He built coalitions and he got it done. How did the voter ID bill get passed, which dealt with this illegal immigration issue? How did it get passed? By building coalitions and getting things out of committee. So every time something fails, you say, well, it was the Speaker's fault, or the Democrats threatened me. You know, that does not sound to me like the type of fighter we need who's going to stand on principle, but not only stand on principle, but is going to find like-minded Republicans who are able to get some things passed. A couple of very conservative pieces of legislation got passed last session. So how did they get passed?
Both of them voted for the Speaker. It was very simple. I did not vote for the Speaker in that, but Sid Miller and I forgot the representative who carried the other bill that you mentioned. What was the other bill?
Voter ID.
Voter ID. Both of them voted for the Speaker. There were only 14 of us that had the guts to say we are true conservatives and we're not going to support the Speaker.
Representative David Simpson voted against the Speaker, and he got his bill all the way to the House floor on transportation security agencies patting you down. So to say that a person who voted against the Speaker can't get anything done simply flies in the face of the historical reality. There are people that vote against the Speaker all the time and still get things done.
Okay,
What did he get done? It didn't pass.
time.
I wish it would have passed because I voted for it and I stayed with it. I'm sorry.
Here's what we want to get to now. Let's talk a little bit about fraud. Okay, let's get away from the Speaker and all this, and let's think about fraud in social services. We know it's there, so both of you give us some ideas on how the state of Texas could address the issue of fraud, waste, and abuse and the high cost of social services.
First of all, we can do what I said before. We can pass a bill that would get illegal aliens off all the rolls of Texas benefits. Second, when we find someone who is committing fraud in a Texas state agency, we've got to prosecute them to the limit of the law. We've got to get rid of them immediately. We can't tolerate fraud in Texas state agencies. Matt, do you have any... That's a tough one.
There's no question fraud is a big problem. Everybody knows it's going on. The issue is how do you catch it? Okay, so you've got to have people with the ability to investigate. When someone comes forward and says, I only make $5,000 a year, so I'm entitled to state benefits, then you're going to have somebody who actually goes out and checks that, okay? And that's a very difficult thing to do. Now, one thing we've seen even in the schools, this is one way we can do it. In the schools, I've heard directly from teachers that there are families that are lying about their income so their children don't have to pay for meals at school. And you know what they can do at the schools? they can actually have them bring in a tax return. Okay? That's one step to get some fraud right there.
All right, very good. Y'all still with us back there? Could you tell these guys what a great job they're doing for me real quick? The home stretch, gentlemen. All right. The last one, and Matt, you start off this discussion. Public school finance solutions. Public school finance solutions.
Sure Leo can't go first?
It's all you.
I've been spending a lot of time with superintendents, with teachers. I've visited a number of the schools. I've been in the classrooms. It's a huge, important topic. There is enough money in the school system right now, okay? Let's just make that statement. Because you can go back over the last 10 years, and education spending has gone up 95% in 10 years. It's gone up significantly. But one of the problems we have, let's identify the problem. You have rich schools and you have poor schools. And the way the formula is written is so complex, even a lot of the superintendents don't understand it. So we're going to have to address the issue of the funding formula for schools. It's inequitable the way it is. You have, even here in Smith County, you can go to Chapel Hill and they get one price, they get one reimbursement for their students. And you go to Troop and they get something like $1,200 to $1,500 more per student. So we've got to simplify the formula, and we've got to make it so that districts around the state cannot use their influence and from the urban areas to make it so that the formula is geared towards keeping their school funding at a certain level. Now, that sounds real simple to say that. That's very, very politically difficult to do. I'm like Leo. I wish we could do away with all the property taxes tomorrow, change the funding system for education to a broad-based consumption tax so it would be a much larger tax base, would be much more stable over time. But the reality is the political will probably doesn't exist to get that done right now. But let me tell you, we can make adjustments to the formula. And we can actually help schools with the money they're already getting by cutting the strings that are attached to the funding. We're running our schools out of Austin, not out of Tyler. And if you'll give them the same amount of money, but just cut the strings and give them the flexibility to use it how they see fit, you will see a lot of efficiencies take place in the education system.
I've got just a couple of points to talk about as far as public school financing. When we cut the public schools this last session, we did cut the public schools. And the public schools were crying. They were screaming. Superintendents start laying off teachers around the state until the legislature start writing these superintendents saying, you better start getting rid of your overwhelming staffs that they bring with them from district to district as they progress to higher schools during their superintendent's career. Then we told the parents who dwell in those districts, you've got to start making contact with your local school boards and tell them that you don't want to see teachers laid off, that you want what the legislature wanted, and that is 60% of all school dollars going into the classroom and not to the school district, to the superintendent and his staff, because the superintendent and his staff have increased by over 40% in the last 5 years. And it's ridiculous, really. They can get rid of half their staffs right now. Another thing we can possibly do to save millions of dollars right here in Smith County. And some of you are going to probably hate me for this, but there are 10 school districts here in Smith County. We used to have what is called a county superintendent. One superintendent for all 10 school districts with an assistant superintendent in each existing school district. So that we're not paying salaries of $100,000 or $200,000 to 10 different superintendents and their huge staffs, but we're paying it to one superintendent and a modified staff at county level. I introduced that bill one time and it didn't go anywhere.
Let me interrupt you right
Sure.
there just 1 second. The answer is not to create more mandates out of Austin. That's what you just heard. We're going to force a percentage on you. Guess what? What Bullard is doing with their administration is different than what TISD is doing with their administration with Chapel Hill with White House. So you're going to write 60% on the board down in Austin and then just force that down on the school districts. And then you're going to tell them, oh, by the way, your superintendent is fired. We're hiring one for the entire county. Let me tell you, that kind of top-down approach is the exact wrong way to do it. The right approach is to find the mandates, everything that we're doing out of Austin, and cut the mandates and let the local superintendents defend the decisions they make to the local people. But until you give them the flexibility to handle their own budgets the way they want to, if you talk to them, they'll tell you, Matt, I've got money over here that I wish I could spend over here, but the state says I can't. So the answer is not more mandates out of Austin.
For the last 2 sessions, there hasn't been a single mandate to public schools or to counties. Mandates have all but gone to the wind.
Representative,
There are no more mandates
That's-
in public schools, Matt.
You got to be kidding me.
I am not kidding you, Matt. There
Okay.
are no mandates. I didn't vote for a single, and I'll never vote for a mandate.
There are so many mandates. Have you heard of the standardized test that they're forced to take? Have you heard of the 15% of your end of school course requirements? Have you heard of all the mandates that
Matt, the
if you
school
talk-
districts asked for the standardized testing because they wanted to get rid of the text testing.
You can't make the statement that there are no mandates on schools. That is so
It's just-
far
it's-
from reality.
It's a change. Oh, I'm not saying there are no mandates on schools. I said for the last 2 sessions, we did not pass a single mandate on schools.
That's not true.
The standardized testing replaces the text testing.
The bill that was passed last session, which forced all the schools into to make STAR 15% of a child's grade point average, was a state mandate. It was universally rejected by school districts all over the state. So much that the Texas Education Agency finally said, Uncle, we're not going to enforce it, and they gave the school districts a waiver. That was passed last session.
And I think what I'm trying to say is that you've got to have the guts down there to cut school funding when school funding has been the greatest increase in our budget next to health care that we've seen in the last 10 years. School funding and let me make one other point here. Robin Hood does not work. Robin Hood does not work, and we've got to terminate. We've almost terminated Robin Hood for good. It's almost gone. A city like Highland Park, which is a very wealthy school district, was sending out some $30 to $40 million a year to fund other school districts across the state, while at home in Highland Park, women were having bake sales to fund their own program. That's ridiculous. There are different classifications for school districts. You know, if you have minorities, if you have children with disabilities, you get more points than other school districts that don't have minorities or children with disabilities, that are more wealthier. But Robin Hood doesn't work. That's not the solution to the problem.
We have Robin Hood now.
Yeah, we do. It's almost gone. We cut Robin Hood dramatically during the last session of the legislature.
If you give them the same amount of money that they've got now, and you cut the regulations so that a local ISD, what does ISD stand for? Independent School District. They're not independent, folks. They're run out of Austin. If you will give the flexibility to the local school board and the local principal, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to file a bill that says superintendent can hire whoever's most qualified to go teach a shop class. If there's a retired engineer that wants to teach a shop class, I'm not going to make him go jump through hoops and chase a certification. Right now, they don't. I talked to one man whose wife was very proficient in Spanish. Their school needed someone to come in and teach English as a second language. The superintendent, the principal, knew this woman was wonderful in Spanish. It took them 6 weeks to get Austin to approve a waiver, to come into the classroom and teach Spanish. You can go look at Khan Academy, which is this new online learning tool for people learning math. It's this guy who's just found a very creative and simple and direct way to teach math and algebra to students. Guess what? It'd be illegal in the state of Texas for him to go in a classroom because he's not certified, because of the regulations. Let's take the regulations off our school districts, and then the responsibility is on us to hold those superintendents and our school board accountable. Let the superintendent hire who he wants to hire, and then defend the decision to the parents.
Let's go a step further. Let the school board hire who they want to hire as superintendent. The best superintendent of schools in the New Orleans School District was a retired Army general who had no superintendent experience whatsoever. I would say a great businessman going into a school district that's spending $60 or $70 million a year is probably something that we need more than someone who goes up the track in the education chain of command and finally becomes a superintendent and then goes from one school district to another until he's old enough to retire, and then he goes to the educational training centers and he consults for the next 15 to 20 years, and at that time he's wealthy enough to do what he wants to. But I would say don't stop with the superintendent.
Well, what about the regulations that are mandates that are coming out of Austin? You were not even aware of the 15%. That in the last session, they passed this 15% rule. All the teachers have talked about it. Read the newspaper articles. Unfortunately, you didn't show up to the education forum we have here. How did you vote on that?
I couldn't. I was being treated for cancer.
How did you vote on that?
I don't recall. I voted with the majority of the conservatives in the House, as I usually do.
Well, we need to go line by line through the education code. One thing that you see is that teachers, when they're teaching a subject, they can't stop. Okay, let's back up. Businesses say they want people with critical thinking skills and know how to analyze a problem. Well, critical thinking skills means you have time to try something and fail. You don't have time to fail in the classroom anymore. You don't have time to let the students fail and try something different. Why? Because the Texas Essential Knowledge Skills says you got to keep moving. We have to cover everything on this 26-page list. Sorry, students. I know we'd like for you to stop and drill down and have the flexibility to really help you get this concept. We can't. We got to keep moving. That's because Austin's told us how to run our classrooms. And I don't know what in your legislative career you have done to address that.
All this rhetoric sounds good and well. But when you get to Austin and you're one vote, just one vote, it's very difficult to influence anything, really. It takes several years before you can start influencing anything. Everything Matt says are things that could and should be done, and I agree with a lot of it. But you can't just change things like that overnight. It just doesn't happen that way. If you've got leadership who doesn't want the change to be made, if you got a governor who doesn't want the change to be made, it's not going to be made. You can try and you can work as hard as you can, Matt. But hopefully, when you go down there, you'll find out exactly what I'm talking about.
About 20 seconds, Matt, if you want to respond.
I know you were a freshman once.
Long time ago. That's right.
And we saw, just to our east, David Simpson, a freshman, go down there. And David Simpson got stuff. He got the attention of the entire state of Texas on the TSA groping bill. He got everyone's attention. He had a bill passed in the House. It ended up not being taken up in the Senate. So the idea that someone going down there, standing on principle their very first time, can't get anything done. He had the attention of the entire state of Texas. He had national attention for that bill, and he was a freshman.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
We've still got about 30 seconds. I'm sorry, Matt. I think
Do we, what about any solutions for looking outside the state of Texas for academic improvement? Do you have any quick ideas on that?
Well, I don't think we have to look outside the state of Texas. We have told kids for years now, you have to go to college to be successful. College is a great thing, but there's a lot of kids that need to be going to learn how to weld, learn how to turn a wrench, learn how to cook a meal, learn how to do things that are skilled. So we need to be, like I said, I want a bill that allows the superintendent to hire whoever he wants to come in and teach a shop class, hire a chef to come in and teach a cooking class. I've talked to superintendents right here in Smith County that said, you know what? We lost our shop program because I couldn't find anybody who had a certification to come in and teach shop. I want to remove that restriction. Let's get back to vocational training. I learned how to weld. I learned how to show sheep and pigs. And I learned how to, run a saw and a cutting torch. Those things are valuable. About to build a pipeline through Smith County, maybe we need some more welders.
I agree fully. We don't need a one-track going to college. Not all kids are qualified or want to go to college. So we should have technical training in high school and above that at Tyler Junior College that can provide people with professions so they will not get on welfare but start to work immediately.
Okay. Now we come to the close. So let me explain to you what you can do with your 2 minutes each in closing. And Matt, since you went first, you're going to close. You'll be last, so Leo's going to go first. Now, Leo.
A question about the closing is, we have a chance to respond to each other?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm getting there. Your close is 2 minutes. You can use that to close the deal. You can use that to ask your opponent a question. You can use that to bring up a topic that you wish we had talked about tonight. Or you can complete a thought on something. So you use it as you choose. Now, if there's a need for a rebuttal, you're going to get 30 seconds to do the rebuttal, and Jason's going to time it all.
Matt, I'm not going to say a word about you. Not a word. I just want to talk about myself and my 14 years in the legislature. Every year I've been classified in the top of all conservatives in the Texas House of Representatives. There are 7 principles that I based every vote that I cast on. Number 1, I believe that free enterprise is the greatest economic system in the history of the world, and I've got the highest business voting record in the entire legislature, a cumulative 96% over 7 sessions. I believe in limited government, limited taxation, traditional values, and I've signed a no tax increase pledge. Traditional values, I was joint author of the bill that said no same-sex marriage in Texas, and we will not recognize same-sex marriages from any other state in the union. I believe in private property rights, and I was a joint author of the eminent domain bill that the governor signed last session. I believe in our Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms. I've been endorsed by the National Rifle Association and the Texas State Rifle Association. I've got a 100% voting record for all 14 years in the legislature. And finally, there is no one more pro-life in the Texas House of Representatives than I am. And I've been endorsed by the Texas Right to Life with a 114% voting record. They give you extra points when you either introduce a bill or carry a bill on the floor, and the Texas Alliance for Life. I'm proud of my voting record. In addition to that, I am a full-time legislator. I'm in the office every day at 8 o'clock, and I leave when I have to leave, but I'm available within 15 minutes. 15 minutes. My staff is the greatest in the legislature. My 3 ladies have been with me for 14 years. We get along great together, and they perform the greatest constituent service of any office in the House. We meet for 140 days in Austin. What do we do for the rest of the time? We help our constituents, and we do that the best of any house. Thank you, Diane, for that.
Folks, it's okay to pick a new quarterback every now and then. You don't have to look back on all the accomplishments that have been done and say, that didn't matter. It did matter. But we are facing a challenge in this state that takes a fresh conservative approach. Someone who's going to stand on principle, who's not going to shrink back when the Democrats threaten him, who's going to be willing to be the only vote if he's standing on principle. Now, I'm going to say a couple things and I'll give you a chance to respond. Because you started out running on these principles, and in all your literature when you ran, you talked about those things. But you left out two things you also ran on. You ran on term limits and on not taking the House retirement money. Both of those pledges you promised the people of this district. What has happened to those promises? Now, I'll give him a minute to respond to that. Let me just say, it still matters what politicians say. It still matters what we do. And folks, I expect to be held accountable. I really do. The district belongs to you. This is your representation. We have challenges ahead. I have a great deal of respect for Representative Berman, and he served faithfully over the years. And if you think it's time for a fresh approach, then I would challenge you to help lead the way. I'm willing to serve and I'm willing to lead, and I'll reserve the balance of my time for you to respond.
Thank you, man. At the end of 8 years, I was ready to get out of the legislature. Governor Perry contacted me, the Speaker of the House contacted me, and they asked me to consider staying in the legislature because they were losing too many senior Republicans in the Texas House. I said I would consider it. The newspapers did a poll here in Tyler, and 70% of my constituents at that time said we want you to remain in the legislature. The governor did a television ad, several television ads that appeared locally, and so did the Speaker of the House. They said, don't blame Leo for violating this term limit pledge. We ask him to stay. Vote for him, please. That's all I have to say, man.
Regarding the retirement money?
At that particular time, my wife died. My wife died of cancer. I married a teacher. She had no retirement. At that time, I changed my mind on the retirement system, which doesn't pay very much, and you have to pay for it anyway. You'll find out. They're going to take money out of your pay every month. You pay for the retirement system. I had to provide for my current wife, Dr. Lou Ann Berman. She's been a treasure to me. I love her dearly, and I wasn't going to leave her without having a retirement. So I changed my mind. I paid all the back pay back into the system so I can get a retirement and put her name on it. And that's exactly why I used the retirement.
Gentlemen, that concludes this evening's debate. Well done. Would you agree, folks? Thank you all so much. I certainly hope this is beneficial to you all. God bless you, and get out and vote.